This is the Dollemore Daily, and I'm Jesse Dollemore. I talk about Donald Trump and corruption a lot, mainly because there's a lot of corruption involved with Donald Trump as president of the United States. The other reason is because it's important. We should hold our elected officials accountable for not just ethical behavior, but moral and upright and legal. Back in December, the Supreme Court agreed to hear an appeal from Donald Trump related to 3 different cases that are running through the federal appeals courts right now that have been ruled on by the federal courts against Donald Trump, and he is appealing to the Supreme Court. Well, today, Tuesday, the 12th, they are hearing those arguments. And then in June sometime, we're going to hear what the decision is. And it's very important that the Supreme Court, do the right thing in holding accountable not just Donald Trump, but future presidents related to their claim of an almost unchecked executive privilege or amnesty against prosecution, or even, which is a constitutional thing, but against even indictment, against even Donald Trump thinks investigation. He can't even be looked into while president of the United States. Right now, 3 different congressional committees and the district attorney of Manhattan, Cyrus Vance, are seeking Donald Trump's financial documents, checks, tax returns, and credit card transactions, as they were. Now, Congress has a right to these through statute, through United States Code, in order that they can write future legislation to hold our political leaders accountable relative to ethical constraints. And Cyrus Vance, Jr., in Manhattan, is conducting a probe, a criminal probe, into Donald Trump's use of his money to pay hush money payments to a couple of women who have claimed to have had sex with Donald Trump. Stormy Daniels and McDougal. So there is cause to want to get to the bottom of what Donald Trump has done in his private life, in his civilian life, not as president of the United States. He was seeking the presidency at the time, but being president doesn't make you above the law. It doesn't make you immune from consequence of your illegal activity. During oral arguments in these different cases that have come out, the president's lawyers, I use that term loosely, president, Donald Trump's lawyers have argued some pretty ridiculous things. That he cannot be subpoenaed, that even in this case, financial institutions that have done work for him, whether it be tax preparation or accounting or managerial work, they can't even be subpoenaed. Mazars USA is one of these companies. From the legal brief of Donald Trump's lawyers, I'm going to read something. These subpoenas are all expansive, burdensome, and unfocused fishing expeditions. They are inappropriate and should be invalidated. The president cannot effectively discharge those duties if any and every prosecutor in this country may target him with criminal process. That's what they've argued in different legal briefs. Again, first of all, they're not subpoenaing the documents from Donald Trump. They're not asking him for them. They're asking Mazars USA, which is his accounting firm. They're asking Deutsche Bank for records. They're not asking him directly. He doesn't have to do anything. No burden is on him whatsoever. Nothing should be taking him away from being president of the United States. Nothing is hindering him from doing his duties, his elected duties as the president. Cyrus Vance, the district attorney I've talked about in Manhattan, he has argued this in legal briefs. The mere risk of interference with official functions does not afford a president categorical immunity against subpoenas for documents concerning private conduct. Presidents throughout history have been subject to judicial process in appropriate circumstances. Now, this is obviously an appropriate circumstance, and there is precedent for it. There is precedent for the President of the United States not being above the law, not being immune from having to answer subpoenas. 1974, Nixon, the Supreme Court ruled that he did indeed have to turn over tapes and documents limiting his executive privilege during the entire Watergate investigation. And then 23 years later, in 1997, Bill Clinton faced the same fate at the hands of the United States Supreme Court when he tried to not testify in a case with Paula Jones, a woman he sexually harassed. Remember, he was forced to give a videotape deposition. Not immune from his bad behavior. He ended up being disbarred, by the way, for lying while under oath. Also impeached, and then found he was acquitted by the Senate. Now, I'm going to read, and this isn't like a legal opinion, this is just a statement that was made by a guy named Harry Sandick, who used to be an assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, and he has been quoted as saying, "Under its own precedent, it is hard to see how the Supreme Court can allow Trump to block congressional or prosecutorial subpoenas to third parties like banks and accounting firms. Trump literally would have to do nothing to comply, since the subpoenas were served on banks and accounting firms, not on him personally. These subpoenas have nothing to do with the president acting as president, but instead concern the president acting as a private citizen." Now, as I've said, lower courts have all ruled against Donald Trump in these cases. And that is what leads us to where we are now, where he has appealed it to the Supreme Court, and they have indeed agreed to take the case. And now, here's where it gets very Trumpy. That he's whining that he's going to be treated unfairly by the Supreme Court because of two things that have been said. Some in official capacity from Sotomayor, and then also something that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was quoted in an interview having said during the campaign. Now, here's a video, and I'm going to get to what those things are more specifically, those two things I just mentioned. But here's a video of Donald Trump in India. Of course, there will be the timestamp at the bottom, so you don't have to watch the whole thing if you don't want to. You'll know where you are. But here's a video from Donald Trump in February when he was in India, whining on an international stage, calling these two women inappropriate. They're speaking inappropriate, which is rich coming from Donald Trump, who every other time he opens up his flap under his nose is saying something inappropriate. Watch this.
Mr. President, you just addressed coronavirus, so I will put that aside for the moment. You tweeted about Justice Sotomayor yesterday, saying that she and Justice Ginsburg should recuse themselves from future cases dealing with the administration. What is the basis for your opinion on that?
Well, it's very obvious. I mean, I always thought that, frankly, that Justice Ginsburg should do it because she went wild during the campaign when I was running. I don't know who she was for. Perhaps she was for Hillary Clinton, if you can believe it. But she said some things that were obviously very inappropriate. She later sort of apologized. I wouldn't say it was an apology, but she sort of apologized. And then Justice Sotomayor said what she said yesterday. You know very well what she said yesterday. It was a big story. And I just don't know how they can not recuse themselves for anything having to do with Trump or Trump-related. The right thing to do is that. Now, as a Supreme Court justice is a different standard. But at the same time, I think it's a higher standard in a certain sense. So they'll have to decide what to do. But her statement was so inappropriate when you're a justice of the Supreme Court. And it's almost what she's trying to do is take the people that do feel a different way and get them to vote the way that she would like them to vote. I just thought it was so inappropriate. Such a terrible statement for a Supreme Court justice.
What was inappropriate about the statement? I'm not an attorney, so I can't really look into
you know what
these,
the statement was, John.
Well, she seemed to criticize the White House for running to the Supreme Court at the drop of a hat to seek a
No,
stand.
I don't think that was it. But I think what she did say is she's trying to shame, the way I look at it, he's trying to shame people with perhaps a different view into voting her way. And that's so inappropriate. So let's see what happens. We have things, whether or not they recuse themselves, both. I mean, look, Justice Ginsburg, during my campaign, I protested at the time. She apologized in a very minor form. And what Justice Sotomayor said yesterday was really highly inappropriate. And everybody agrees to that. Virtually everybody. I've seen papers on it. People cannot believe that she said it. Yeah, please, go ahead.
What a whining, sniveling jerk-off Donald Trump is. The temerity to sit there and talk about someone being inappropriate with all of the ethical concerns around him, all of the immorality around him, all of the ethics breaches around him. If it weren't so disgusting and sad, it might be funny. It's just difficult to find it funny. Now I want to talk about these two different cases that he's talking about. Ruth Bader Ginsburg first. In 2016, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was quoted in an interview as having said, "He is a faker. He has no consistency about him. He says whatever comes into his head at the moment. He really has an ego. How has he gotten away with not turning over his tax returns? The press, the media, the press, seems to be very gentle with him on that." Where's the lie, Donald Trump? You are a faker. You do not have any consistency about you. You do say whatever it is that's going to benefit you in the moment. She did come out and apologize for it. She admitted it may have been inappropriate for her to weigh in on the presidential election. She's a citizen. She still maintains a First Amendment right to free speech under the Constitution that she knows very well. She also knows her role as a Supreme Court justice, that it might have not have been customary for her to weigh in like that. And she did indeed apologize. So for Donald Trump to act like she didn't is just BS. In fact, he answered with a tweet saying, "Justice Ginsburg of the United States Supreme Court has embarrassed all by making very dumb political statements about me. Her mind is shot. Resign." Her mind is shot. Classic projection from dumb guy Donald. Now, the other case, Sotomayor, she did nothing inappropriate. In fact, she registered her position in a case called Wolf versus Cook County, which was another one of these cases where the administration runs to the Supreme Court to try to get a stay when a lower court has ruled against the administration. Rather than going through the proper channels, the proper processes, they run right directly to the Supreme Court, circumventing several steps along the way. And she said as much in her dissent in this particular case, from which I'm going to read. Second, this court is partly to blame for the breakdown in the appellate process. That is because the court in this case, the New York cases, and many others, has been all too quick to grant the government's reflexive requests. Also, she said, perhaps most troublingly, the court's recent behavior on stay applications has benefited one litigant over all others, meaning the administration, meaning Donald Trump. That is a valid criticism. Formally registered in her written dissent on the case. There's nothing inappropriate about that. There's nothing unethical about that. It was in due course of her duties as an associate justice on the United States Supreme Court. So, Donald Trump is going to whine. Donald Trump is going to complain. Donald Trump is going to cry foul, no fair. And Donald Trump will be wrong. But I want you to be apprised of what's happening, because if indeed they do overrule these lower courts, we're going to have a situation on our hands where Donald Trump is immune from ethics complaints and subpoenas and accountability. He will be deemed a king by the United States Supreme Court, a man above the law, a man able to do anything he wants while standing with the moniker of president above his head. That is antithetical to the rule of law. That is antithetical to the America that we have said we are and that we aspire to be. Donald Trump isn't a king. Donald Trump is barely a president. But we'll wait. A lot of headlines are going to come out today because these hearings, if you want to listen to them, are being broadcast for the first time because of the coronavirus, that they're being remotely heard, the arguments, and they're actually broadcasting them. So if you want to search the web and find out where they are, you could listen, you could find them. I'm sure some of the news outlets are going to be playing them. I certainly will be listening to them. So I'd love to know what you think. 714-576-4054. Email me daily at dollemore.com. Listen, if you'd like to support my work, I hope that you'd think about it. You can click the join button below the YouTube or below the YouTube video there and become a channel member for fewer than $2 a month. You can support my work. Independent media is very important. There's other ways, though. You can buy the merchandise. I have those Treason 45 shirts, Dollemore Daily t-shirts. You can even check out my podcast, which is completely separate than YouTube. It's not video. It's just an audio podcast I do twice a week with my co-host. It's a little different than this. There's a lot more liberal use of the F word because I don't have YouTube breathing down my neck relative to censorship or constraints on advertising and demonetization issues. So anywhere you find podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, I'm on Spotify. You just search my name or I Doubt It with Dollemore. That's the name of the show. Anyway, I'll see you next time. I appreciate you guys very much. Be genuine. Take care of one another.